Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome to our webinar on artificial intelligence and the American Heart Association. My name is Pat Dunn, and I'm the Director of Digital Solutions for the AHA Center for Health Technology and Innovation. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Ali Gates, who's the National Health Tech and AI Initiatives Director, and he's also a member of our CHTI team. So welcome, Ali.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be here.
So, Ali, you have such a cool title. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and your background and basically what led you to where you are now in your role with the AHA.
Yeah, my title is a bit of a mouthful, so sometimes it's a bit difficult for me to actually describe my title here, or at least pronounce my title. But all jokes aside, born and raised in New York City, and the youngest of four, and which makes me feel a bit younger than what I am. But raised in a sort of a fun household. Mom and dad, I like to describe them as superheroes. Both having to navigate inner city conditions of New York City, and finding their way at Columbia University where they met in the 1970s, right? And so just speaks a lot about, how they set the foundation around commitment and excellence. But, just about my journey, I studied at Alfred State College and then at MIT, where I focused on computer science with a focus on algorithms and data structures.
Awesome. So, what about your experience before the AHA? What did you do before then?
Yeah, my career journey started out in New York City. I began working in education as a software engineer at the New York City Department of Education. Followed by a 6-year stint at Google where I was working as a software developer and then transitioned over to product management. And as you know quite well here, and our working relationship is, I'm a guy that's very curious, right? I like to ask a lot of questions, and so prior to that, as a software developer, you're working to just ultimately kind of build solutions and build features and products. But there weren't any real guidance in place. And so, spending time at Google, understanding sort of there's a true product development process in place, that opened my eyes, right? And so I wanted to understand, what that process looks like, ask questions, right? And so that curiosity had transitioned me over to product management, and it really kind of started my career journey from there in product. And from Google, I worked with a few ex-Googlers at the time, and we built up a consumer-facing rewards-based app, which was called Claim It. And that application, was truly sort of a spin-off of a product I was working on at Google, which was called Google Offers. So if you remember Groupon or Living Social back in the day, while I was a software engineer at Google, we were working on sort of a product called Google Offers, spinoff of Groupon, right? To really kind of take up some of that market share. They were doing a really good job of penetrating that market. So, we deprecated that product, but I felt that there were a ton of pain points that, I wanted to pursue, and there was a lot of opportunities hidden in plain sight. And so we went off and, built this startup and raised some capital, built up a small team in New York City, and really took it from 0 to 1. And it was a fun time, but it was also a lot of learning experiences from there. And so after that, spent some time working at the CDC pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, where I worked on the COVID-19 tactical team and building up the contact tracing app, which was used by, essentially everyone, right? We were all at home. And from there, I constantly just pursued my passion in engineering, building up the You Good app, which was a mental health app, right? Which was really focused on allowing people of color and minorities to ultimately report their status on how they're feeling, right? And so there was a ton of AI and machine learning using that product, right, to really kind of predict and provide sort of recommendations, right, on sort of some suggestions on approaches individuals can take to sort of achieve a better mood. And so that app was award-winning app, on the Apple App Store in 2002, and I had transitioned over from the CDC at the time to LME, which was a healthcare startup that was building a software as a service technologies for families that are in ABA care. And so when you think about, 1 out of 5 of us are diagnosed with some type of learning disability, right? That's a really large group of individuals, right? And so being able to kind of build solutions that can really help individuals understand those insights, be able to track their progress, right? Schedule care, things of that nature is something I was working on. And from there, I've been fortunate enough to land in this role here, working closely with you and others.
That's amazing. So from MIT to Google to the CDC to the AHA, it's pretty obvious that the American Heart Association is serious about AI, bringing in someone like you. So it's an amazing journey. And was that app what got you interested in health tech and AI, or did you have some prior experience with that?
No, that's a good question. Throughout my career, I've had some wonderful positions and have been fortunate enough to interface with amazing colleagues like yourself and many others I work with here. I can shout them out. But it's a laundry list of folks here that I appreciate and I enjoy working with. But my mother, worked in healthcare for her entire career. And we were raised on the principles of doing good, helping others and giving back. And with that, I applied this rubric to, push the status quo and building direct consumer products. And so, after Claim It, working at the CDC really became an eye opener where I understand truly what my purpose was, right? When you think about, building, technology. And so I ultimately want to build technology to really empower people and help people really kind of navigate through really difficult, manual process and tasks, that becomes sort of a daunting task for individuals when you think about in the healthcare space. And so, looking at how a solution can truly sort of, brighten the mood of an individual or really kind of help someone be able to evaluate care or be able to track their care progress and so much more. I mean, that's a really good feeling.
So when you're not doing all this cool AI stuff, what are things that you do outside of your day job when you're not doing AI? How do you relax and unwind?
Yeah, another good question. You know, family means everything to me. Outside of work, I'm extremely focused on, recruiting my siblings and my mother to relocate down here to Houston, so I can avoid making trips to New York City. But all kidding aside, I have a passion, in fitness and health. And we use that here, with our 15-year-old who has a pretty active lifestyle as a student athlete. But personal hobbies include cycling, volunteering, and obviously learning music is something that I enjoy doing. It was a passion of mine growing up. And so, I'm hand on keyboard right now, learning how to play the piano and others. So, that's something I do in my downtime. But personally, I like to keep a beginner's mind where I'm open to learn and be enlightened. In case in point would be, sort of over the past few years or so, I've sort of gathered a dozen or so certificates, from Six Sigma and so much more. And so, keeping that curiosity and that beginner's mind is super, super important to me going forward.
That's amazing. So I'm sure our audience has a wide range of skills in AI and health tech, but I'd love to help you teach our audience, really some of the basics of AI. I know it's been around a while. It didn't just happen like, a year and a half ago, but why is it all of a sudden so popular? What happened? What's been the tipping point?
Yeah, I use this word quite a lot here at the AHA, but, credit credit sort of, OpenAI, right? For driving a significant amount of adoption and product market fit. And obviously, they're one of the leaders in this space. But when you think about the noise, around AI and sort of this exciting sort of, this momentum, artificial intelligence built, as you mentioned, we could go back to 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, folks were, hand on keyboard developing, sort of machine learning models and artificial intelligence. But, OpenAI really kind of set the standard and set the tone for driving that adoption, right? And Microsoft's commitment to that and partnership, has really kind of helped that because Microsoft obviously has a hand, or at least a handhold on, sort of a lot of these, organizations, sort of technology stack and so much more. But, when you think about the overall sort of projection of the AI landscape, I read a report that, AI is projected to add about 15.7 million, sorry, 7 trillion to the global GDP by 2030. So that's ultimately more than China and India combined, right? So when you think about that, AI has a ton of potential, right? And it's going to be widely adopted over the next, 5 years or so as we approach 2025. But what it is it's really just, it refers to a technology that can, perform tasks and make decisions in an intelligent, way, like, an intelligent human way, without, the explicit program, right? And so that ultimately can automate and streamline many tasks, freeing up sort of the humans from repetitive and tedious work, right? And these systems can ultimately analyze large amounts of data, identify patterns, and make predictions beyond human capabilities. And I typically like to kind of give, when I have discussions like this, more tangible, sort of examples of pain points, just to help listeners understand, how the stack can be leveraged and adopted. And, when you think about sort of the healthcare industry at large, it produces 30% of the world's data. And so when you think about sort of the healthcare funnel for determining eligibility, how you could potentially leverage AI, let's just kind of paint a picture around, some of the manual tasks for determining eligibility rate. And again, just kind of going through the funnel here. And this by no means is a particular order here. I'm just going to kind of summarize this. There are a ton of tasks, and with the majority of them being manual, whether it's the provider going through sort of the initial assessment pad or screening and eligibility. When you think about sort of the AI capabilities to ultimately be trained to streamline a lot of these tasks, right? Let's just say using sort of OCR technology, right? It can ultimately sort of analyze contracts to determine rate levels, right? So when you think about that, leveraging AI in that aspect can truly reduce the time of evaluation, helping to get people in care much faster. And that's truly our purpose, especially when you think about, the AHA and that footprint.
Almost all of the companies that we talk to refer to themselves now as an AI company. Sometimes I struggle to figure out the difference between some of the, calculations I would do in an Excel spreadsheet 20 years ago, from an algorithm to now what's called AI. A lot of terms get thrown around, things like machine learning, natural language processing. You have your deep learning, your convolutional neural networks. Can you just help kind of piece some of those apart and unpack some of those terms?
Yeah, so you're looking for more of just kind of like just a general sort of understanding of what machine learning is and some of these core technologies, right? And concepts.
Hmm.
Machine learning are is essentially algorithms that learn from data to make predictions and decisions. As I mentioned earlier, without the explicit program, sort of you have natural language processing, which is defined by, or acronym it will be NLP.
Hmm.
It really is a AI that can be sort of understood, and process human language, enabling technologies like chatbots and virtual assistants. You see a lot of adoption there with some of these solutions, with some larger players in the space that's raising a lot of capital. And when you think about some of the business cases and needs for a lot of organizations, right? Chatbot is truly at the top of that sort of list of food chain of solutions, that a lot of these large organizations want to adopt. Deep learning is one of my favorites. Is a subset of like machine learning that uses neural networks to really to kind of like find complex patterns in data. Powering advancements in areas like computer vision and speech recognition. And so, those are kind of like the sort of a concise summary of the three sort of core, concepts.
So it sounds like the difference with machine learning, the system is actually learning and making decisions rather than in the past, if I created that algorithm, I would have to hard code in the responses. So that's
Yeah.
basically a fundamental difference.
Mhm.
And then, so then when we get into deep learning, I know, one of the opportunities and challenges there is around the size of the data set. So, what are we talking about when we really are truly talking about a deep learning system? What are we talking about as far as the number of data points in a system?
That's an open-ended question. We could be here all day for that.
Hmm.
But to your point, deep learning, it's really the structure and the framework around deep learning is really being able to kind of understand sort of unstructured data and structured data, right? And so, having a solid understanding of that, is at the core of deep learning, right? And so a part of that is then, obviously classification. You and I have spoken great enough about classification. That plays a significant part of when you think about sort of leveraging deep learning for AI outcomes. And so, yeah.
So when people use the term like supervised and unsupervised, is that how, when you're referring to something being classified, seems like in some of these unstructured, that's like it's not even classified. The system does the classification for you. Is that a true statement?
It's partially true. Obviously, you have to obviously define these classifications and think of them as cohorts, right? And so, that's kind of just, my little twist to, what you described there. But, you pretty much hit it on the nose, but I would just kind of add that.
Great. So, as a shameless plug, I actually wrote an article that it's really a primer and it's really basically, it's almost a glossary of terms. I believe we put it into the chat. It's actually has a 2025 publication date. It's out online ahead of print, but it's printed in our hypertension journal. So, again, if you're just digging into AI and trying to figure out more than how to spell it, I'd recommend reading that. It's really designed to be a primer. It's focused on hypertension. There's clearly other applications, which really goes into my next point. So, why are we so excited about AI, Ali? What are some of the opportunities? And I know the potential for driverless cars, for other things, probably some gaming and different things, but maybe especially in the health space. Why are we so excited about this?
Yeah, not to stare left here, but it's funny. I have an electric vehicle and it has self-driving capabilities, and while it's exciting, it's also quite scary, right? Enabling that feature, um, but big data has become sort of the capital. And when you think about some of the biggest companies, the Googles and other that offer, sort of, a suite of robust solutions, right? They're leveraging sort of data, right, to really kind of help define those solutions, right? And so when you think about that, that's a fundamental core of really sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so, but to your question, sort of looking at some of these, looking at some of these, self-driving cars and where we are today, there's, so many different use cases on how artificial intelligence can be leveraged. It's interesting, right? Because when you think about sort of let's just say 15, 20 years ago, this sort of native app development trend, right? Where if you wanted to build something, right, as you sort of build it on a smartphone, and that still exists, right? Because your smartphone is with you 24/7. When we think about that, my favorite quote is, there's an app for that, right? And so, but when you think about AI, where we're headed, as I mentioned, well, as you mentioned, ultimately, you think about self-driving cars, better health, sort of, you see this excitement around, sort of what Tesla's doing with robotics. So there's so many use cases you can apply both personally, professionally. Here at the AHA, we have obviously an interest and appetite of, using artificial intelligence to improve, productivity and efficiency, right? To, sort of, help us with some of the manual tasks, that we do here, right, internally, but also, some of our dependents, right, which is providers, and get that guidance and sort of responsible use of that as well. So, we're heading in the right direction, I feel. Specifically, I kind of want to put an emphasis around this, in the healthcare space. AI, presents an enormous opportunity, that can truly transform the space, but it still requires oversight from medical professionals, right? And so, health is at the core, an essential of sort of our day to day, right? And so, making sure that these technologies and solutions are are adopted, but also, sort of monitored and governed by medical professionals and humans specifically is going to be quite important.
Yeah, you mentioned driverless cars, and that's maybe a little ways out. But even in my own vehicle now, I mean, if I get too close to the car in front of me, the car starts telling me things like "slow down," or if I'm going into the other lane, it's giving me. So those are elements where it's assisting me as a human. It's hopefully making me a better driver.
Yeah,
Hopefully, will result in me not having an accident. And you can make that leap into healthcare if an AI system can help the human doctor or nurse maybe not miss something,
mhm.
and so which can result in a better outcome.
Which
Oh,
present, a number of, sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, some of the opportunities, we get excited about, I think, are, kind of in the data analytics space, a lot of it in the imaging space, and the imaging in the car is seeing that rock in front of you or the car in front of you. But obviously there's a lot of medical imaging, a lot of discovery, drug discovery, research, even recruiting patients and participants for trials, training and simulation. My favorite one is really on the patient engagement. Can we use different languages and different tone to really help people? So those all have kind of clinical opportunities. But you mentioned earlier, even like with a chatbot, really helping with repetitive cycles. So even documentation. I've
Yeah,
heard that, today, doctors and nurses spend over half of their clinical time in documentation.
yeah.
So it seems like there's huge opportunities not only on the clinical care, but on the really the business of healthcare. Any thoughts on which do you think we should be putting more energy towards, or do both, or what are your thoughts?
You know, just not to be, too data driven here, but that's just how my mind works. But when you think about, up to 97% of data generated by hospitals, oftentimes goes unused. And so, we've gotten better, over the years, specifically in the space. But when you think about that, to your point on some of these exciting opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, sort of, when you think about AI, there's a use case for that, right? Sort of like, as I mentioned, there's an app for that. So, uh, there are a ton of pain points within the healthcare industries, and I think we're seeing uh, excitement around some of these AI opportunities as you described, whether it's in education, so much more. Even highlight some of the work you've done on the care plans is quite important. How what that looks like and how you're looking to obviously embed AI into those products there, but you know. It's just there's a really exciting wave, and I think that the providers I speak with or the medical professionals I speak with, they have that curiosity, they have that appetite, and have that sort of that enthusiasm and excitement towards leveraging some of these tools, just to handle a lot of these repetitive tasks and manual tasks as you described there. And I think I mentioned earlier, leveraging technology like OCR and others. It's funny because at a prior company, we had built a product that um, essentially was being able to determine rate levels for care evaluation, right? And so when you think about that, there a provider, a given provider was receiving sort of an inbound of a number of patient referrals, right? And so ultimately want to accept these patients, but they had to go through all this rigorous and manual process of determining evaluation. And the one daunting task is that, the part of my interview sort of, journey with these providers, that the one daunting task was looking through sort of these contracts, right? Because these contracts, they look the same, right? There was no sort of standard, template, right? But these contracts could be anywhere between 10 to over 100 pages, right? So just imagine you, Pat, you're filling all these requests that are coming in, right? Let's just say hundreds. And then you have to then, open up a PDF and then kind of find specifically, rate levels or the data, right, that you're looking for. I mean, that's a huge pain point. And someone, who's moving fast in the healthcare space, that can take you maybe up to an hour. Right? That's a significant pain point. That takes a lot of time. So when you think about that, building a tool to be able to really kind of one, ingest the actual PDFs, determine the rate level, right? By pinpointing the rate level, and then ultimately kind of, sort of, the output is, sort of sharing what those rate levels are and making an accurate assumption around those rate levels. I mean, that truly frees up that provider, right? And so opportunities like that exist, in the market, and it's quite exciting.
Very cool. So with everything that's exciting, there's always concerns. So
Oh yeah.
what are we concerned about with AI? What are some of the things that are holding us back?
Yeah. Obviously, sort of the responsible use of AI is at the forefront of here at the AHA, but also, it's really become a common theme with any company, that I speak with, right? And so when you think about, in the healthcare space specifically, you think about sort of the bias, the biasness, the hallucinations, lack of transparency, and even sort of the trainings of these, or even at the trainings of these models to be able to sort of ultimately kind of handle real time, data, such as live events, right? Like, there's limitations if you use solutions like OpenAI, right, or some of these other players, right? If you know, say, hey, what's the weather right now, right? Tell me the weather. It ultimately can, give you sort of, what the weather is, right? And so, if you think about a lot of those sort of concerns there, that those become barriers, right, for adoption, right? And those become sort of, common themes and concerns, that we want to address to really kind of, to really help the patient experience, also the provider experience. So addressing sort of the ethical piece also is another key piece, but yeah, that's what I'd ultimately kind of say.
What's so interesting is those are all very legitimate concerns. So the bias in the training data set, the preventing hallucinations, the lack of transparency, those are concerns that we should have with or without AI. I mean,
Yeah.
those are just human nature concerns that we always need to be aware of. We all live with our biases. We all make things up. Sometimes we do it intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, and sometimes we're not as transparent as we need to be. So it's a good, just frankly, a lesson in how to behave. That the ethical standard, not in just in AI, but just in healthcare and just in how we live our lives.
Mhm. Well said.
We had a big event a couple weeks ago at our scientific sessions, and our team, our CHTI team, put on a health innovation pavilion. We had a couple of panels on AI, and I'd love to get your thoughts on a couple of themes that came out of that. One of the panels, they talked about cognitive AI, and they talked about a digital twin. You help us understand what is that? What is a digital? And it seems like a term that's now being thrown out there a lot. What is a digital twin?
Pat, I want to first, and I hate to pivot this back over to you, but you've been close to really kind of building out this, building out sort of this, sort of agenda and really kind of in pipeline of talented speakers that present at session, at scientific sessions. But I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on, what that means to you, right? Because I can go down a rabbit hole, but I love to kind of get it. We had some great speakers speak a lot about the digital twin as well. Then also most important, keeping it human and AI.
We do, and frankly it's a digital analogy to you as a person, and we can use it to even to test and even simulate and prototype. How's this going to work for this person? So it's almost like it is almost like your twin that we can do things with, and it can be transformative. I truly think, especially on the cognitive side of the AI, I think there's some amazing things we can do with really try even helping to understand all of the data coming in, all the data inputs and all the data outputs. You really do need a twin, to
Mhm.
help you to help you sort out some of those things.
I
So
love
I
the
do think it's starting to become a maybe like AI itself. It's like, okay, we're going to throw that term out there to see, I mean, probably all of this is some form of a digital twin in
you
that
know
sense.
And I love your response to it because a digital twin can also relate to sort of elements of prompt tuning, right?
Yeah.
You rely on a human to really kind of provide the guidance, and so you can kind of have a sort of a understanding or a comparison between sort of how your algorithm ultimately, or how your model is ultimately answering sort of this question versus how the human is, right? And so I love where you're going with that. But to your second point, um, around sort of keeping, around digital twin, or keeping sort of the human in AI. Um, as I mentioned earlier, specifically with healthcare and in every, and several other heavily regulated industries, when you think about, fintech or healthcare, having that human oversight is super important. It's critical. And so I mentioned at the top of the meeting, and I think I'd like to share this also, Pat. When you think about the adoption of AI, and so when you think about the market over the last 2 years with this AI sort of boom and trend, it has impacted the market, but it also has benefited the market, right? It's allowed us to be able to kind of like reach level set and actually want to learn
Yeah.
uh, and adopt these new technologies. And yeah, you've seen the news where companies have become more sort of lean in a sense, right? But most importantly, I think it's important to understand that um, you know AI and these machine learning, are ultimately sort of built by humans. They're deployed by humans and they're trained by humans, right? And so we should ultimately embrace that.
Oh, I love that. And even going back to just helping with some of the repetitive things. I don't think doctors go to medical school and nurses go to nursing school to
Mhm.
become better documenters. I mean, to, really nail their charting and epic. I don't think that's why they're there. They're there because they want to help people. They want to be involved in that healing process. And to the extent we can get them out of that chart and back in front of that patient and doing good things, I think that's going to be better for all.
And
I,
yourself, you serve as an important example of that, right? You think about sort of your background and the story you share with me, and in Chicago, uh,
Mhm.
just constantly having that beginner's mindset to want to learn. It says a lot about you, Pat. That's why I ultimately enjoy working with you.
Love it. Thank you. And likewise. So the final part of this, and I see we do have some questions, so we definitely are going to address at least a few of these. But I'd love to at least get some high level thoughts on why is the American Heart Association interested in AI?
Oh, yeah, it's a
And
good
I
question.
know we could go on for a couple of days on that as well.
Yeah,
And I know it's a work in progress, but let
yeah.
me get your thoughts.
Yeah, this is a net new initiative, which is led by myself and and a few others here that I can shout out. But let me kind of start off with sort of how we got here. I think our CEO Nancy, she sets a standard for everything we do here, and her finger is constantly on the pulse of innovation and technology. And as the age they become more sort of digital, let's just say. Nancy and others here, Patrick and John. I mean, they've constantly transformed this organization, and so I'll speak for Patrick here. Who leads sort of our CHTI organization. A text message was sent over to he sent over a text message to sort of our CEO and saying, hey, we should keep our eye on this AI wave, and so Nancy, having been sort of a thought leader and a forward-thinking CEO, she's like, I agree. And so that's the story that Patrick tells me, and I know it's true, right? In my interactions with our CEO. And so when you think about that is, it's keeping your fingers on the pulse, right? When you think about, our mission aligned business, sort of, it's a business that's very successful that, John Miners has built. And when you think about potentially leveraging AI to really accelerate sort of those, those mission aligned areas, accelerating sort of at the core of what we do, research and science, and also leveraging AI like Copilot and others right now as a trial for us to be able to ultimately experiment. right? I think it's, that's just how we're thinking through things. And most importantly, at the top of the food chain, we're constantly just thinking through sort of the responsible use of AI. And so that's how we've gotten here. But what we're doing, we're excited to, sort of, to announce, sort of, for AI specific, research funding, 12 million bucks. So, that, the RFP goes out the top of this year, towards the end of this conversation. Actually, we talked a lot about this yesterday. I would like to actually just, share that link with the participants and the viewers here. So that way they can provide their feedback, right? So it's a call to action there to be able to kind of, have them really to just kind of take a look at our survey, and we constantly are reassessing responses. So that way we can obviously make much more informed decisions. And so, but what I want to emphasize is that our Chief Data Science Officer, Jen Hall, someone I enjoy working with here. When I first entered this net new role, she shared that, as we were kind of building out the, sort of the, this framework of AI specific research funding. She was like, "Hey, we've been funding AI projects over the last, several years." And so, but now having a dedicated focus, right? To fund AI, AI research projects is quite exciting. And so our CEO, Nancy, announced that at Scientific Sessions. It was well received. And so I'm super excited to really kind of, go down this path on, really just, advancing sort of, science and research around artificial intelligence.
Amazing. So I'm going to start queuing up some of these questions here, but while I'm doing that, I believe you also had a survey that you wanted
Oh,
to
I mean,
announce and maybe put the link in the chat.
yeah, we love to.
And
Yeah.
while you're doing that, I'm going to just start with some of these questions, and you and I can kind of take these back and forth. The first one I think I can probably take questions about how AI can benefit patients who suffer from various stages of heart failure. And that's a great example, and multiple ways that that can happen, clearly from the diagnostics and imaging. But quite honestly, a big challenge we face in heart failure is what's called guideline directed medical therapy. And you don't need AI to do GDMT, but maybe some of the tools in an AI-based solution can really help. And frankly, not even just picking the right drug, but really picking the right approach to a patient, getting the tone right, getting that person's readiness for change, getting that person to the place they need to be able to really be more successful in their treatment. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, very clinical in nature, but also very behavioral in nature as well. There was a more of a comment about, again, about the supervised versus unsupervised models. And again, when I look at this even from a data science and a researcher perspective. I'm also thinking of these as variables, and you have, I see regression in here. And I know, logistic and even linear regression is even part of the analytics that can be used in AI models. We talked about the big data. I also see researchers, with even smaller data sets, but they're doing, cluster factor analysis. They're using random forest models, decision trees. So I would say, and I'd love to get your opinion, Ali, but the AI research does not always only have to be for the big data scientist. I think even individual researchers with smaller data sets, they can still apply some forms of AI analytics to their models.
Yeah. I see that Stephen here is quite engaged in the chat. So I want to take on one of those one of his questions, um, and Stephen, thank you for those questions. But I'm just looking through the chat, so I'm multitasking here. But one of the questions is the last one I see that Stephen pointed here, and it mentions, how do you reduce the level of AI hallucinations in your outputs? It's a good question. I touched on a little bit of this throughout the conversation. I kind of break it down a few key steps, right? Without going into great details. When you think about the training of data quality, right, enhancing that is critical and super important, right? Implement sort of guardrails, right? Specific views, right? Or sorry, specific rules and constraints around that. And then most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, the conversation, it's really kind of that feedback loop and human oversight. That's where you kind of incorporate, sort of the prompt tuning side of things, the decision tree, well, determine the decision tree, and then start really kind of moving the transition over to the prompt tuning side of things. And so, it's a loaded question, but it's a good one, and it's something that most of these AI companies, from what I understand, is at the core of what they're looking to ultimately evaluate. So,
And I think to add on to that, I think that's where the human element can come back into play. Really also taking just another look at what is the system recommending? Does it appear to be right? And can it be validated?
mm,
So, can you get a reliable response, or are you getting, just like in any form of analytics, if you're getting a high amount of variation in those responses, then that should be something to be concerned with. If you're getting, a pretty consistent response and the humans are validating and it seems to be working, and then that it's not going to completely eliminate hallucinations, but there is a way, I believe, to manage that.
yeah.
There's a question about AI implemented in clinical trials, bring back to clinical care, aligning AI tools. Yeah, so
Sorry, go
yeah, I
ahead.
would say, AI could be very helpful even just in recruitment for a clinical trial. It's so hard to find those patients, and the tools themselves can be, I think, can be very helpful in the recruitment, and then also the implementation of the trial itself.
We can be here all day answering these questions.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and Stephen's questions about, responsible use and governance. I know some of these things will be coming out as we move forward. But these are all things. There was another comment I'd love to get your thoughts on as far as agents and bots. So,
Let me
and
see if
again,
I,
it could be there could be different forms of these, but what are your thoughts on that, Ali?
well, let me just see this question. Agents, I mean, intelligent agents. Okay, let me, and I think Pat, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday. When you think about artificial intelligence, it really has, I mean, there are thousands of solutions. And there's truly, an AI can truly do a handful of things, right? And there's a lot of advancements that are happening, but when you think about sort of, you know, some of its outcomes, right, for AI, you think about sort of, as I mentioned earlier, classification, predicting agents, the sensory side of things, and much more, right? And so those are really at the core of some of the AI outcomes. The agents are phenomenal, right? Because they're acting right as that digital twin, right? So when you think about uh, you know solutions that are out there in the marketplace that are that are powered by sort of AI agents, they generate AI, right? And so these agents are basically sort of acting on behalf of a human with human oversight, right? And so I see that as a groundbreaking sort of product, right, that has grown substantially. And so I think I wouldn't think it's hard to say is it the next revolution, but I think it's truly the next digital. I mean, there's a lot of excitement as as agents are ultimately acting as sort of that digital twin as you described earlier. So whether it's helping sort of providers or medical professionals being able to sort of handle the influx of patient requests, patient concerns, diagnosis, right? I think agents are being widely adopted in those areas.
So, a final thought, Ali, where do you think this is all headed? Is this man versus machine? Are the computers going to take over the world, or are we going to be able to do some good things here?
Yeah, let's just go back to sort of these let's embrace, let's embrace these, this adoption of this exciting technology that's causing a lot of momentum. Again, trained by a human, built by a human, deployed by a human, right? And so, and I think that's how I ultimately want to sort of answer your question.
I love it. Well, with that, thank you very much for your time and expertise. Really enjoy working with you, and I know we got good things cooking in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat.
Yep.
Bye.